In the closing decades of the 19th century, along the eastern seaboard of the United States, a remarkable transformation was taking place. The period between approximately 1870 and 1900 witnessed an unprecedented accumulation of wealth in the hands of a relatively small number of families. This era, which came to be known as the Gilded Age, took its name from the novel by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner, published in 1873. The term itself suggested something important about the nature of the times. A gilded object appears golden on its surface, but beneath that shimmering exterior lies something less precious. The authors intended this as commentary on an age when dazzling displays of wealth masked deeper social problems, when prosperity and poverty existed in stark proximity, when the gap between the very rich and everyone else grew wider with each passing year. The families who rose to prominence during these decades did so through railroads, steel, oil, shipping, banking, and real estate. They were the Vanderbilts and Astors, the Morgans and Rockefellers, the Carnegies and Fricks. Some descended from colonial-era merchants and landowners, families whose names had appeared in American society registers since before the Revolution. Others were newly wealthy, having built fortunes in a single generation through industrial enterprise and financial speculation. Together, these families created a way of life that drew heavily on European aristocratic traditions while maintaining distinctly American characteristics that reflected the unique circumstances of their nation's rapid development. The wealth they commanded was extraordinary by any measure. When we consider that the United States had no federal income tax during most of this period and that industrial monopolies operated largely without government regulation or meaningful oversight, the fortunes accumulated reached levels that would be difficult to match in relative terms even today. A single family might own multiple mansions, each requiring a staff of dozens. They would travel in private railway cars fitted with all the comforts of home. They commissioned yachts that rivaled naval vessels in both size and appointments. They filled their homes with art treasures purchased directly from European galleries and auction houses. Yet this was not simply a story of material excess. The very wealthiest families of the Gilded Age created an entire social system, complete with unwritten rules, seasonal calendars, and hierarchies as rigid as any European court. They established which families belonged to polite society and which did not, regardless of how much money the excluded families might possess. They determined what constituted proper behavior, from the correct way to leave a calling card to the precise number of courses that should appear at a formal dinner. They set standards for architecture, fashion, art collecting, and philanthropy that influenced American culture for generations to come. The lives these families led were orchestrated with precision. Every hour of the day followed established patterns. Clothing changed not once but several times between morning and night. Meals were elaborate productions involving multiple servants and countless specialized utensils. Travel between city mansions, country estates, and summer cottages followed a predictable annual cycle. Social obligations filled calendars months in advance. Nothing was left to chance or spontaneity. Everything was designed to demonstrate refinement, breeding, and an effortless command of complex social codes. This documentary exploration seeks to reveal the daily realities behind the gilded facade. How did these families actually spend their time? What filled their enormous houses? Who took care of all the details that made their lifestyle possible? What rules governed their interactions with one another? By examining the specific, concrete details of Gilded Age life among the very wealthy, we can better understand not only this particular historical moment, but also the origins of many aspects of American high society that persisted well into the 20th century. The era that follows in this exploration was brief in historical terms, lasting only about 3 decades. Yet its impact extended far beyond its own time. The institutions founded during the Gilded Age, from museums to universities, continue to shape American cultural life. The architectural landmarks built by wealthy families still define the character of cities like New York and Newport. The social patterns established then influenced how Americans thought about class, taste, and proper behavior for generations. Even as the world changed dramatically in the 20th century, echoes of Gilded Age society remained audible. The Grand Estates. The most visible manifestations of Gilded Age wealth were the houses themselves. In cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, and in resort communities like Newport, Rhode Island, wealthy families commissioned palaces that rivaled anything in Europe for scale and magnificence. These were not merely large houses, they were statements of power, demonstrations of cultural sophistication, and stages upon which the drama of high society played out. The grandest of these estates were the summer cottages of Newport. The term cottage itself was deliberately ironic, an inside joke among families whose summer retreats contained dozens of rooms and required staffs of 30 or more servants to maintain. The most famous of these was the Breakers, built between 1893 and 1895 for Cornelius Vanderbilt II. Designed by architect Richard Morris Hunt, the Breakers was modeled on Italian Renaissance palaces, with 70 rooms spread across 5 floors. The house covered approximately 138,000 square feet in total area, with living spaces occupying more than 62,000 square feet. The footprint alone covered roughly 1 acre of the 14-acre estate overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Every detail of the Breakers reflected not only wealth, but also the latest technological advances. Electric lighting illuminated every room at a time when fewer than 5% of American homes had electricity. The house featured both hot and cold running water, delivered in either fresh or salt varieties to each bathroom. Hydraulic elevators moved between floors. A telephone system connected the main living areas with the servants' quarters, allowing the family to summon assistance from any room. The house was built to be as fireproof as possible, constructed primarily of masonry and steel with minimal wooden elements. Even the boiler was located in an underground space beneath the front lawn, separated from the main structure. The materials used in constructing the Breakers came from around the world. Marble was imported from Italy and Africa. Rare woods arrived from Asia and South America. Mosaics were created by Italian artisans. Architectural elements, including mantels and doorways, were purchased from French chateaux and shipped across the Atlantic. The walls and ceilings featured platinum leaf in some rooms, gold leaf in others. The dining room ceiling alone required several months to complete, with painters working on scaffolding to create elaborate frescoes. Other Newport mansions followed similar patterns of extraordinary scale and international materials. Marble House, also designed by Hunt for William Cassam Vanderbilt, was completed in 1892 at a cost of $11 million. The house contained approximately 500,000 cubic feet of marble from American, Italian, and African quarries. The entrance hall featured massive columns of yellow marble from Italy. The ballroom was styled after the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. A Chinese tea house stood on the grounds overlooking the ocean, its exotic design reflecting the Gilded Age fascination with Asian art and culture. Rosecliff, built in 1902 for silver heiress Teresa Fair Ulrichs, was modeled after the Grand Trianon at Versailles. Architect Stanford White designed the house in the Baroque Revival style, creating spaces specifically for entertaining on a grand scale. The ballroom at Rosecliff was the largest in Newport, with a floor designed to accommodate hundreds of dancers. The gardens featured elaborate terraces, fountains, and carefully manicured plantings that required a full-time gardening staff to maintain. The Elms, completed in 1901 for coal magnate Edward Julius Berwin, was based on an 18th-century French chateau, but incorporated all the most modern technology of the period. The house featured central heating, electric lighting throughout, and a complex ventilation system that brought fresh air into every room while filtering out dust and cinders. The estate included formal gardens designed in the French style, with geometric patterns, carefully trimmed hedges, and classical statuary positioned throughout the grounds. In New York City, wealthy families built equally impressive mansions along Fifth Avenue, though urban constraints meant these houses occupied narrower lots than their Newport counterparts. The William Kissam Vanderbilt Mansion, completed in 1883, was among the first of the great Fifth Avenue palaces. It featured 660,000 cubic feet of Indiana limestone on its facade, carved into elaborate Gothic Revival details. Inside, rooms were styled after French chateaux, with carved oak paneling, stained glass windows, and massive fireplaces imported from European estates. The scale of these urban mansions was remarkable given the limited space available. A typical Fifth Avenue mansion might be only 40 or 50 feet wide, but would extend back 100 feet or more, rising 4 or 5 stories above the street level with additional floors below ground for kitchens, storage, and servants' quarters. Every inch of space was utilized with careful planning. Public rooms occupied the lower floors, family bedrooms filled the middle levels, and servants lived in smaller rooms near the roof. The construction of these urban palaces required years of planning and execution. Architects would spend months developing detailed drawings, creating elaborate renderings that showed every decorative element. Once plans were approved, construction might take 2 to 3 years or longer. Skilled craftsmen from Europe and America worked on these projects, with specialists brought in for specific tasks. Italian marble cutters would shape stone elements. French wood carvers would create intricate paneling. Painters trained in classical techniques would execute ceiling frescoes. The coordination of all these artisans required careful management and substantial budgets. The technological systems incorporated into these houses represented the cutting edge of available innovations. Heating systems evolved from simple fireplaces to complex central heating installations. Large coal-fired furnaces in basement rooms would heat water or create steam, which circulated through an extensive network of pipes and radiators throughout the house. These systems required constant attention from engineers or specially trained servants who monitored temperatures, adjusted valves, and ensured adequate fuel supplies. Some of the most advanced houses incorporated zone heating, allowing different areas to be maintained at different temperatures depending on their use. Plumbing systems in these mansions were far more elaborate than anything found in middle-class homes of the period. Multiple bathrooms, each equipped with porcelain fixtures manufactured by the finest suppliers, were connected to both hot and cold water systems. Water was stored in large tanks, often located in upper floors or attic spaces, and gravity-fed to the various fixtures below. Some houses incorporated pumping systems that could deliver hot water on demand, an innovation that required both sophisticated equipment and skilled maintenance. The breakers even offered a choice between fresh water and seawater in its bathrooms, an extravagance that demonstrated the lengths to which wealthy families would go to provide unique amenities. Electrical systems, when they were installed, represented another layer of complexity and expense. The earliest electrical installations used direct current systems that required power generation equipment located on the property itself. These systems were expensive to install and operate, requiring trained electricians to maintain them. As alternating current became more common and electrical utilities began providing power in urban areas, houses could connect to municipal grids, though private generation remained common as a backup in case of power failures. Electric lighting was installed gradually, often room by room, as families experimented with this new technology while maintaining gas lighting as an alternative. Ventilation received careful attention in the design of these houses. Fresh air was essential not only for comfort but also for health, as contemporary medical theories emphasized the importance of avoiding stale or vitiated air. Elaborate ventilation systems brought fresh air from outside, often filtering it to remove dust and particulates, and distributed it throughout the house through hidden ductwork. Used air was exhausted through separate ducts, creating a constant circulation that kept interiors fresh. In summer, some of the most advanced houses incorporated early forms of air cooling, using ice or cold water to chill incoming air before it entered living spaces. Security systems protected these houses and their valuable contents. Safes built into walls or located in basement strong rooms held jewelry, important papers, and other valuables. Some houses incorporated early alarm systems that would sound bells or summon servants if windows or doors were breached. Night watchmen might patrol the grounds of the largest estates, ensuring that no unauthorized persons approached the property. The combination of physical barriers, technological safeguards, and human vigilance created multiple layers of protection for families and their possessions. The architectural details of these houses reflected careful attention to European models. Wealthy American families hired the most prestigious architects of the period. many of whom had trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Richard Morris Hunt, who designed many of the most famous Gilded Age mansions, studied in France and brought back principles of classical design that emphasized symmetry, proportion, and the use of historical styles. His buildings combined elements from Renaissance Italy, Baroque France, and Gothic England, creating eclectic but harmonious compositions. Inside these mansions, rooms served highly specialized purposes. A typical great house would contain a formal entrance hall, a drawing room for receiving afternoon callers, a library for the man of the house, a morning room for the lady of the house, a ballroom for entertaining, a dining room, a conservatory filled with exotic plants, and perhaps a music room or art gallery. Each room would be decorated in a different historical style. The ballroom might evoke Louis XIV's Versailles, the library might suggest an English country house, the morning room might feature Italian Renaissance details. Technology was incorporated into these houses wherever possible, though often hidden from view to maintain the historical atmosphere. Central heating came from massive coal-fired furnaces in the basement, with hot water or steam circulating through pipes concealed within walls. Electric lighting fixtures were designed to resemble gas lamps or candle sconces, disguising their modern function. Kitchen equipment included the latest stoves and refrigeration systems, all located in basement or service wing areas where they would not intrude on the family's living spaces. The grounds surrounding these estates were as carefully planned as the houses themselves. Wealthy families employed landscape architects to create gardens, lawns, terraces, and pathways that complemented the architecture. In Newport, houses typically sat on estates of 10 to 15 acres, allowing for elaborate gardens, carriage houses, stables, and greenhouses. Some families maintained greenhouses that could produce fresh flowers year-round, ensuring that the mansion's many rooms always featured elaborate floral arrangements. Maintenance of these properties required constant attention and considerable expense. A house the size of the Breakers needed a staff of more than 50 during the summer season when the family was in residence. Painters worked continuously to maintain exterior surfaces exposed to salt air. Gardeners tended the grounds in all seasons. Cleaning staff worked daily to dust and polish surfaces, wash windows, and maintain the countless objects displayed throughout the house. The expense of operating such an establishment was substantial even for the wealthiest families, and over time this financial burden would contribute to the eventual conversion of many of these houses into museums or institutions. Yet, during the height of the Gilded Age, these grand estates served as the primary settings for the elaborate social life that defined the era. They were stages for costume balls and formal dinners, for afternoon teas and evening musicales. They housed art collections worth millions, libraries containing thousands of volumes, and furnishings crafted by the finest artisans in Europe and America. They demonstrated to the world that American wealth could rival that of European aristocracy, that American taste had achieved a level of sophistication equal to anything the Old World could offer. The servant system. Behind the scenes of every Gilded Age mansion was an extensive household staff that made the family's elegant lifestyle possible. The very wealthiest families might employ 30, 40, or even 50 servants, each with specific duties and a clearly defined place in the household hierarchy. Understanding this system of domestic service is essential to comprehending how these great houses actually functioned on a daily basis. The hierarchy among servants was strict and carefully maintained. At the top stood the butler, who managed the male staff, oversaw the wine cellar and silverware, and served as the primary intermediary between the family and the rest of the household. The butler was typically a man of considerable experience and sophistication, often European-born, who understood the complex rules of formal service. His responsibilities included supervising footmen, ensuring that meals were served properly, maintaining the household's valuable silver and crystal, and managing the intricate protocols of formal entertaining. A skilled butler might earn $100 per month or more, a substantial salary for the period. Equally important was the housekeeper, who held authority over all female servants. The housekeeper managed supplies, hired and supervised maids, kept detailed accounts of household expenditures, and maintained control of linens and other materials. She would meet regularly with the lady of the house to discuss menus, review expenses, and plan for upcoming social events. The housekeeper's domain included storerooms filled with linens, china, glass, and other household goods, all carefully inventoried and kept under lock and key. Like the butler, an experienced housekeeper commanded respect and a salary that reflected her important responsibilities. Below these senior positions came a range of specialized roles. Footmen were prized for their height and appearance as much as their abilities, as they added visual grandeur to formal occasions. They would ride on carriages, serve at table, and attend to various duties throughout the house. The most prestigious households employed matched pairs of footmen, men of similar age, height, and build, who appeared together in the dining room wearing identical livery. Valets attended to the gentlemen of the house, caring for their clothing, assisting with dressing and grooming, and managing their personal effects. A lady's maid performed similar services for the women of the family, helping with elaborate toilettes, maintaining expensive gowns and accessories, and attending her mistress at social events. The kitchen staff operated under the direction of a chef, often French-trained, who earned between $100 and $180 per month, plus commissions on market purchases. The chef would consult daily with the lady of the house about menus, prepare elaborate meals for the family and their guests, and supervise assistant cooks and kitchen maids. The kitchen staff might include a second cook who assisted the chef and prepared simpler meals for the servants, kitchen maids who cleaned and helped with food preparation, and scullery maids who washed dishes and maintained the kitchen. Chambermaids were assigned to specific bedrooms or suites of rooms. Each chambermaid would be responsible for keeping her assigned areas immaculate, making beds with fresh linens, emptying chamber pots before indoor plumbing became universal, sweeping ashes from fireplaces, dusting furniture and objects, and ensuring that fresh water and towels were always available. The work was physically demanding and never-ending. In wealthy households where guests frequently stayed for extended visits, chambermaids might change bed linens twice daily, once in the morning and again before the occupant retired for the night. The laundry operation in a great house was a substantial undertaking requiring specialized staff. The head laundress was a skilled professional responsible for maintaining expensive and delicate household linens. She supervised assistants who did the actual washing, managed the drying and ironing of everything from simple dish towels to elaborate lace tablecloths, and ensured that nothing was damaged in the process. Laundry work was among the most physically demanding in the household, performed in hot, steamy conditions with heavy equipment. A head laundress might earn $30 per month, while her assistants received about $18. Additional servants included parlor maids who maintained the drawing rooms and other public spaces, dining room maids who set tables and assisted in serving meals, nursemaids who cared for children, and seamstresses who mended clothing and linens. Outside the main house, coachmen managed the stables and carriages, grooms cared for horses, and chauffeurs drove the early automobiles that began appearing in the 1890s. Gardeners maintained the grounds, working under a head gardener who planned seasonal plantings and managed the estate's greenhouses. Servants' quarters were typically located on the uppermost floors of the house or in separate wings. These rooms were small, simply furnished, and often uncomfortable, being too hot in summer and too cold in winter. Male and female servants were strictly segregated, with separate staircases and corridors ensuring they did not encounter one another inappropriately. Servants took their meals together in a servants' hall, which had its own hierarchy. Upper servants, like the butler and housekeeper, might eat separately from lower servants, and seating at the servants' table reflected each person's rank within the household. The demographics of domestic service varied by region. In northeastern cities, Irish women comprised the majority of servants, often entering service shortly after arriving at Ellis Island. German immigrants were more common in Midwestern cities, while Chinese and Japanese servants were found primarily on the West Coast. In the South, African American women formed the backbone of domestic labor. The work attracted primarily young, unmarried women who viewed service as temporary employment before marriage or as a stepping stone to other opportunities. Relations between servants and employers followed complex patterns that combined elements of formality, hierarchy, and occasionally genuine personal connection. Servants were expected to be deferential and nearly invisible, appearing only when needed and withdrawing as soon as their tasks were complete. They entered rooms backward when serving to avoid turning their backs on the family. They referred to employers using formal titles and never initiated conversation unless specifically addressed. Yet within these formal boundaries, long-serving servants might develop relationships with family members that included elements of mutual respect and even affection. The daily routines of servants began early and ended late. A chambermaid might rise at 5 in the morning to light fires and prepare rooms before the family awoke. Kitchen staff would start even earlier to prepare breakfast. Throughout the day, servants would be constantly occupied with their various duties, with breaks taken in shifts to ensure that someone was always available if the family needed anything. Evening duties might extend until midnight or later when the family was entertaining, as servants waited to help guests depart, clean up after events, and prepare the house for the following day. Training for domestic service was rigorous. Young servants entering service for the first time would begin in lower positions, learning their duties from more experienced workers. A young woman might start as a scullery maid, doing the dirtiest work in the kitchen, and gradually progress to other positions as she demonstrated competence and reliability. The best servants took pride in their work and in their association with prestigious households. Working for a family like the Astors or Vanderbilts conveyed status within the servant community and could lead to better positions elsewhere. The servant problem, as it was known in the Gilded Age, referred to the difficulties wealthy families encountered in finding and retaining good help. In America, unlike in Europe, domestic service was not seen as a permanent career for most people. The American ethos of individual opportunity and social mobility meant that servants often viewed their positions as temporary, leaving for better opportunities when they arose. This created constant turnover and required families to frequently train new staff. Books like Mary Elizabeth Carter's Millionaire Households and Their Domestic Economy, published in 1903, attempted to help wealthy families navigate these challenges by providing detailed advice on hiring, managing, and retaining servants. The system of domestic service that supported Gilded Age wealth was vast and complex, employing hundreds of thousands of people across the country. By some estimates, 16% of New York City's population worked as servants during this period. These workers made possible the lifestyle of leisure and refinement that characterized the era's elite families, performing countless tasks that ensured everything appeared effortless and perfect. Without this army of workers laboring behind the scenes, the grand houses would have been uninhabitable, the elaborate social events impossible, and the image of effortless elegance unsustainable. Daily rhythms and routines. The lives of Gilded Age wealthy families followed patterns as regular and predictable as clockwork. Each day was divided into distinct segments, each with its own appropriate activities, clothing, and social expectations. Understanding these rhythms helps reveal how the very rich actually spent their time and what they considered important enough to occupy their carefully regulated days. Mornings began relatively late for the family, though servants had been at work for hours by the time household members arose. A lady of the house might appear for breakfast between 9 and 10 o'clock, descending to the breakfast room in a morning dress of relatively simple design compared to the elaborate gowns she would wear later. Breakfast itself was substantial, typically featuring multiple courses including fruit, porridge, eggs prepared in various ways, meats such as bacon or sausage, toast and preserves, and coffee or tea. The meal was served by footmen, with the butler overseeing the service to ensure everything proceeded smoothly. After breakfast, the lady of the house would spend time conferring with the housekeeper, reviewing the previous day's expenses, discussing menus for upcoming meals, and making decisions about household matters. This daily consultation was a central part of household management, ensuring that the lady maintained ultimate authority over domestic arrangements while delegating the actual execution to professional staff. The housekeeper would present accounts in a careful ledger, noting expenditures for food, supplies, wages, and other household needs. The lady would approve major purchases, plan for upcoming entertainments, and address any problems that had arisen among the staff. Mid-morning might be devoted to correspondence. Letter writing occupied considerable time for wealthy women who used handwritten notes for everything from personal messages to business communications and social obligations. A lady might spend an hour or more at her writing desk in the morning room, composing letters on fine stationery embossed with her monogram. Penmanship was considered a crucial indicator of breeding and education, and ladies took great care with their handwriting. The morning post would have been delivered and sorted by servants, and responding to letters was considered an important daily duty. For gentlemen of the house, mornings meant business. A man might breakfast earlier than his wife, attended by his valet before departing for his office or private club. The wealthiest men often maintained offices in downtown areas where they could attend to financial matters, consult with business partners, and monitor their various enterprises. Others might spend mornings at exclusive men's clubs where business deals were negotiated over lunch and important relationships were cultivated. The physical separation of business and domestic life was strict, with men expected to keep their commercial activities separate from the refined atmosphere of home. Luncheon was a lighter meal than breakfast or dinner, but still followed formal patterns. Ladies who were not entertaining might take a simple lunch served in an informal dining area. When guests were present, however, luncheon became a more elaborate affair, with multiple courses, carefully selected wines, and table settings that demonstrated the hostess's taste. Afternoon luncheons were popular occasions for ladies to gather, discuss social matters, and strengthen the relationships that defined their position in society. Afternoon hours were devoted to a variety of activities, depending on the season and social calendar. In New York, ladies often went calling, a ritualized form of visiting that played a crucial role in maintaining social connections. Calling involved leaving one's visiting card at the homes of friends and acquaintances, a practice governed by elaborate rules about when to call, how long to stay, and whom one could appropriately visit. A typical afternoon might involve stopping at 5 or 6 houses, spending 10 to 15 minutes at each if the hostess was receiving visitors, or simply leaving cards if she was not. The ritual of afternoon tea provided another opportunity for social interaction. A lady might host tea in her drawing room, inviting a select group of friends for an informal gathering. Tea service was performed with careful attention to etiquette, with the hostess pouring tea and offering it to guests along with delicate sandwiches, cakes, and pastries. The choice of tea service, the quality of the refreshments, and the elegance of the presentation all contributed to the hostess's reputation. In summer, tea might be served in the garden if weather permitted, adding a pastoral element to the genteel proceedings. For those not engaged in calling or receiving, afternoon hours might be spent shopping, attending matinee performances at the theater or opera, or pursuing various cultural activities. Ladies might visit art galleries, attend lectures, or participate in charitable organizations that occupied the leisure time of wealthy women. Physical activities were increasingly popular as the century progressed, with ladies taking up lawn tennis, archery, and eventually even bicycling, though always within the constraints of elaborate dress and rigid expectations of feminine propriety. Late afternoon was devoted to preparations for evening activities. This was when the first of several daily costume changes would occur. Ladies would retire to their bedrooms, where their ladies' maids would help them change from day dress into more formal evening attire. This process could take an hour or more, as elaborate evening gowns required assistance to don properly, corsets needed lacing, hair had to be arranged in complex styles, and jewelry had to be selected to complement the gown. The results of these lengthy preparations were meant to appear effortless, as though the lady simply possessed an innate elegance that required no particular effort to maintain. Dinner was the most formal meal of the day, typically served at 8 o'clock or later. Whether dining en famille or entertaining guests, dinner followed a prescribed pattern of multiple courses, each served with appropriate wines and accompanied by specific etiquette requirements. Family dinners were more relaxed than those with guests, but still maintained considerable formality. Gentlemen would dress in evening clothes, ladies in elegant gowns, and conversation would follow topics considered appropriate for mixed company at the dinner table. Evening entertainments varied by season and personal preference. During the winter social season in cities like New York, evenings might be spent at the opera, at balls hosted by other families, at musical performances, or at formal dinners. The opera was particularly important as both cultural event and social occasion, with wealthy families maintaining boxes at the Academy of Music and later the Metropolitan Opera. Attendance at the opera was as much about seeing and being seen as about appreciating the music, with intervals devoted to social interactions and the display of magnificent gowns and jewels. Opera attendance followed its own set of customs and expectations. Families would arrive fashionably late, making their entrance visible to others already present. Ladies would be magnificently dressed, wearing their finest jewelry and most elaborate gowns. Gentlemen appeared in white tie and tails, carrying opera glasses, and sometimes wearing decorations or medals if they possessed such honors. The boxes themselves were furnished with chairs and small tables, creating comfortable spaces for the family and their guests. Between acts, box holders would visit one another, moving through the corridors and salons of the opera house in elaborate promenades that sometimes seemed more important than the performance on stage. The musical selections at the opera reflected both European traditions and changing American tastes. Italian opera dominated the repertoire, with works by Verdi, Puccini, and Donizetti appearing frequently. Wagner became increasingly popular as the century progressed, though his longer works and more demanding music divided audiences. French opera also appeared regularly. The singers themselves became celebrities, with prima donnas and tenors commanding enormous fees and attracting devoted followings among society patrons. Beyond the opera, theatrical performances provided evening entertainment. Legitimate theaters presented Shakespeare and other classical works, while lighter entertainments could be found at variety theaters and music halls. The most respectable families generally confined their theater attendance to the former category, though younger family members sometimes ventured into more populist entertainment venues. Theater attendance required the same formal dress as the opera, with audiences arriving in carriages and making grand entrances into theater lobbies where they could be seen by other patrons. For evenings spent at home, families developed their own entertainments. Reading aloud was a popular activity, with one family member reading while others listened and perhaps engaged in handiwork or other quiet activities. Playing piano or other musical instruments provided entertainment, particularly if family members had musical training. Card games were acceptable, though gambling for significant stakes was generally discouraged in mixed company. Chess, backgammon, and other board games offered intellectual challenges suitable for evening recreation. The library often became a favored retreat for gentlemen in the evening hours. These rooms were typically decorated in darker, more masculine styles than other parts of the house, with leather furniture, wood paneling, and substantial furnishings, creating an atmosphere of scholarly repose. The libraries of wealthy families contained thousands of volumes, ranging from classics of literature and philosophy to contemporary works, scientific treatises, and historical studies. Some collectors focused on rare editions and fine bindings, building libraries that had value beyond their contents. Smoking rooms or billiard rooms provided additional male spaces where gentlemen could retreat after dinner. These rooms were furnished with comfortable chairs, small tables for drinks, and in the case of billiard rooms, elaborate tables for playing various cue sports. The decoration of these spaces often reflected exotic or masculine themes, with hunting trophies, maps, navigational instruments, or other objects suggesting adventure and worldly experience. Cigars and spirits would be offered, and conversation could range more freely than in mixed company, touching on business, politics, and other topics considered unsuitable for ladies' ears. Ladies' sitting rooms or morning rooms provided equivalent female spaces where women could gather without male presence. These rooms were typically decorated in lighter, more delicate styles than male spaces, with floral patterns, pale colors, and graceful furniture creating atmospheres of refined femininity. Ladies used these spaces for various activities, including correspondence, needlework, reading, and intimate conversations with close friends. The morning room particularly became associated with the lady of the house, serving as her private office where she managed household affairs and conducted the daily business of domestic management. When not attending events elsewhere, families might entertain at home. A dinner party for 20 guests would be followed by music or cards in the drawing room, with gentlemen perhaps retiring to the library or smoking room for cigars and brandy while ladies remained in the drawing room for conversation. Musicales were popular entertainments, with professional musicians hired to perform for guests who gathered in the music room or ballroom. These events combined cultural appreciation with social display, allowing hostesses to demonstrate their refined taste while providing enjoyable entertainment. The daily routines of the very wealthy varied with the seasons in predictable ways. Summer meant decamping to Newport or other resort areas where the pace of social life actually intensified despite the informal setting. Autumn might involve travel to Europe, collecting art and visiting fashionable destinations. Winter was the height of the social season in New York, with constant rounds of entertainments from November through the beginning of Lent. Spring might mean time at a country estate in the Hudson Valley or another pastoral location, where the air was fresher and the pace slightly more relaxed. Throughout all these activities and seasons, the underlying pattern remained constant. Days were divided into carefully regulated segments, each with appropriate dress and activities. Social obligations filled calendars months in advance. Maintaining one's position in society required constant attention to the countless rules of etiquette and propriety. Nothing was left to chance. Everything was orchestrated to demonstrate breeding, refinement, and an effortless command of the complex social codes that separated the elite from everyone else. Fashion and appearance. Personal appearance was a matter of utmost importance in Gilded Age high society, where one's clothing, jewelry, and overall presentation communicated social position as clearly as any verbal introduction. The era was characterized by extraordinarily elaborate fashions, particularly for women, and by the custom of changing clothes multiple times throughout the day to suit different activities and occasions. Women's fashion during the Gilded Age evolved through several distinct phases, but maintained certain consistent characteristics. Clothing was always elaborate, always expensive, and always constructed to emphasize particular body shapes through the strategic use of corsets, bustles, and voluminous fabrics. The 1870s featured the bustle, a padded undergarment that exaggerated the back of dresses, creating a silhouette that contemporary observers found both elegant and distinctive. By the 1880s, bustles had grown even more pronounced, sometimes projecting several inches behind the wearer and requiring considerable fabric to drape over their substantial frames. The 1890s brought a shift toward a more streamlined silhouette, though one no less restrictive. The S-shaped corset pushed the chest forward and the hips back, creating an exaggerated posture that modern observers might find uncomfortable. Women's evening gowns featured low necklines, short sleeves, and trains that swept behind as the wearer walked. Day wear was more modest but equally elaborate, with high necks, long sleeves, and layers of fabric carefully draped and trimmed. The sheer quantity of material in a single gown could be staggering, with some dresses containing 20 yards of silk or more. Luxury fabrics were essential to Gilded Age fashion. Silk appeared in countless varieties, from heavy brocades to delicate chiffons. Velvet added rich texture and deep color to winter gowns. Satin provided lustrous surfaces that caught candlelight or gaslight beautifully. Lace, both handmade and machine-produced, added delicate detail to collars, cuffs, and entire bodices. These materials were often imported from Europe, particularly from French manufacturers who dominated the luxury textile trade. Colors tended toward deep, rich tones such as emerald, sapphire, ruby, and amethyst, though pastels also appeared in spring and summer wardrobes. The construction of these garments required exceptional skill and countless hours of labor. The wealthiest families patronized European couturiers, particularly the House of Worth in Paris. Charles Frederick Worth was the preeminent designer of the period, creating gowns for European royalty and American heiresses alike. Wealthy Americans would travel to Paris for fittings, commission multiple garments, and return home with trunks filled with the latest French fashions. Worth's designs were widely copied and adapted, influencing fashion throughout the Western world. The custom of changing clothes multiple times daily was a hallmark of Gilded Age life. A lady might begin the day in a relatively simple morning dress, change into a walking suit for going out, don an afternoon dress for receiving callers, and finally appear for dinner in an elaborate evening gown. Each change required assistance from a lady's maid, as the complex fastenings and layers of a proper Gilded Age costume could not be managed alone. Some sources suggest that the wealthiest women changed clothes as many as 6 times in a single day, particularly during the social season when morning activities, afternoon calls, and evening entertainments all demanded appropriate attire. Accessories were equally important to achieving the proper effect. Gloves were essential for virtually all occasions, with different styles for morning, afternoon, and evening. Ladies owned dozens of pairs made from kid leather, silk, or lace depending on the occasion. Hats were worn whenever one ventured outside, ranging from relatively simple day hats to enormous confections trimmed with feathers, flowers, artificial fruits, and sometimes entire stuffed birds. The fashion for elaborate millinery reached its peak in the 1890s and early 1900s, when hats grew to extraordinary sizes and featured increasingly exotic decorations. Jewelry played a crucial role in evening dress. The wealthiest women owned collections of gems that rivaled those of European aristocrats. Diamonds, pearls, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires appeared in necklaces, bracelets, earrings, brooches, and hair ornaments. Mrs. Astor famously wore a diamond stomacher worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to her annual ball. Other women competed to display the most impressive gems, turning evening events into competitions of material splendor. Tiaras were worn at the most formal balls, adding a quasi-royal element to the proceedings. The acquisition of significant jewelry required substantial resources and careful selection. Families often purchased pieces from the finest jewelers in New York, Paris, and London. Tiffany & Company in New York became particularly associated with Gilded Age wealth, creating elaborate pieces specifically for wealthy American families. Some pieces were commissioned as custom creations, designed to the buyer's specifications and incorporating the finest available stones. Others were purchased from European jewelers who specialized in serving aristocratic clients. The provenance of pieces, particularly if they had belonged to European royalty or nobility, added to their value and prestige. Storage and security of valuable jewelry required special arrangements. Many houses contained built-in safes where jewelry could be stored when not being worn. These safes, often hidden behind paintings or concealed in closets, were constructed with thick steel walls and complex locking mechanisms. Some families maintained safety deposit boxes at banks for their most valuable pieces, retrieving them only for special occasions. Insurance on valuable jewelry was expensive but necessary, protecting families against loss from theft, fire, or other disasters. The care and maintenance of elaborate wardrobes extended beyond the basic tasks of cleaning and storage. Furs required specialized handling, being cleaned, conditioned, and stored in temperature-controlled rooms during summer months when they were not in use. Delicate laces needed careful washing by hand and drying on special frames that maintained their shape. Beaded or sequined gowns required patient repair work as individual decorative elements came loose. Feathers on hats needed fluffing and reshaping. The amount of labor involved in maintaining a wealthy family's clothing was substantial, occupying ladies' maids and other servants for hours each week. Shoes represented another category of elaborate accessories requiring constant attention. Ladies owned dozens of pairs of shoes crafted from fine leathers, satins, and other materials. Different shoes were required for different occasions and different types of dress. Walking shoes were sturdy and practical, though still elegant in design. Evening slippers were delicate and decorative, often featuring embroidery, beading, or other ornamental elements. Boots appeared in various heights and styles for different purposes. The fit of shoes was crucial, as ill-fitting footwear was both uncomfortable and considered a sign of poor taste. Wealthy families employed specialist shoemakers who would create custom lasts for each family member, ensuring perfect fit. Handkerchiefs, fans, parasols, and various small accessories completed the elaborate assemblage required for proper dress. Handkerchiefs were made from fine linens and decorated with delicate embroidery or lace edging. Fans served both practical and decorative functions, providing cooling while also allowing for expressive gestures and subtle communication. Parasols protected ladies from sun exposure, which was considered harmful to the pale complexions that were fashionable. Each of these accessories came in multiple varieties suited to different occasions and seasons. The perfumes and cosmetics used by wealthy women were generally subtle, as obvious makeup was associated with actresses and women of questionable virtue. Ladies might use rice powder to achieve desired pale complexions, but heavy application was avoided. Lip color was achieved through subtle staining rather than obvious paint. Hair care products included various oils, pomades, and rinses designed to maintain healthy, lustrous hair. Perfumes were typically French, purchased in small quantities at considerable expense. The application of fragrance was meant to be barely noticeable, creating a subtle enhancement rather than an obvious scent. Personal hygiene practices, while perhaps not as elaborate as those of the modern era, were taken seriously by wealthy families. Daily bathing was common where hot water was readily available, though the process was more involved than simply stepping into a shower. Baths had to be drawn, often requiring servants to carry water if the house lacked modern plumbing. Elaborate toilette sets, including brushes, combs, mirrors, and various grooming implements, were crafted from silver or ivory and monogrammed with the owner's initials. These sets were displayed on dressing tables and used in daily grooming routines. Men's fashion was more restrained than women's, but equally governed by strict rules. Daytime required business suits in dark colors, typically black or charcoal gray, with white shirts featuring high, stiff collars. The well-dressed gentleman owned multiple suits, rotating them regularly to maintain perfect condition. Walking sticks and top hats completed the daytime ensemble when venturing out. For evening, men wore formal dress that varied little between individuals. White tie and tails were standard for the most formal occasions, with black tie becoming acceptable for slightly less formal events as the century progressed. The emphasis on proper dress extended to all aspects of appearance. Hair was elaborately styled, particularly for women, who wore it long and arranged it in complex updos secured with countless pins, combs, and ornaments. Hairdressing could take an hour or more, performed by skilled ladies' maids who understood the intricacies of period styles. Men wore their hair short and faces clean-shaven or with carefully groomed mustaches and beards, styles that changed gradually with shifting fashions. Maintaining an extensive wardrobe required considerable resources and attention. Garments needed constant care to keep them fresh and in perfect condition. Ladies' maids would brush dresses after each wearing, spot clean stains, repair minor damage, and ensure that everything was properly stored when not in use. Furs required special handling, as did delicate fabrics like lace and silk. The quantities involved were substantial. A wealthy woman might own 100 dresses or more, along with countless accessories, each requiring storage space and maintenance. The cost of dressing appropriately for Gilded Age high society was enormous. A single Worth gown might cost thousands of dollars, equivalent to many thousands in modern purchasing power. When multiplied across an entire wardrobe and an entire family, clothing expenses could easily reach tens of thousands of dollars annually. This was one of many ways that wealth functioned as a barrier to entry in high society. No matter how much money a family might earn, translating that wealth into the appropriate wardrobe required time, knowledge, and access to the right sources. Fashion served multiple functions in Gilded Age society. It identified one's social position immediately and unmistakably. It demonstrated familiarity with current trends and European styles. It showed that one possessed both the wealth to purchase expensive garments and the knowledge to wear them appropriately. It created barriers between social classes, as proper dress required resources beyond the reach of all but the wealthy. And it occupied enormous amounts of time and attention, particularly for women whose appearances were scrutinized constantly, and whose social success depended partly on wearing the right thing at the right time. Social events and entertainment. The social calendar of Gilded Age high society was a carefully orchestrated sequence of events. each serving specific purposes within the complex machinery of elite social life. Understanding these occasions reveals not only how the very wealthy entertain themselves, but also how they reinforce social hierarchies and established who belong to their exclusive circles. The most anticipated event of the New York social season was Mrs. Astor's annual ball, held each January at her Fifth Avenue mansion. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, known simply as Mrs. Astor or the Mrs. Astor, reigned as the acknowledged arbiter of high society for decades. Her ballroom could accommodate approximately 400 guests, a number that gave rise to the famous concept of the 400. Those families deemed acceptable for inclusion in the very highest ranks of society. An invitation to Mrs. Astor's ball was the ultimate confirmation of social acceptance. Those who were excluded, no matter how wealthy, were definitively outside the charmed circle. The ball followed a prescribed pattern that was replicated at similar events throughout the season. Guests arrived between 10 and 11 o'clock, ascending the grand staircase to be received by the hostess in a formal receiving line. They then proceeded to the ballroom, where an orchestra provided music for dancing. The waltz was the favorite dance of the period, though other dances, including quadrilles and cotillions, also appeared on the program. Dancing continued until midnight or later, when guests would adjourn to the dining room for supper. This meal was an elaborate affair featuring multiple courses, champagne, and other wines served at small tables arranged throughout the dining room. After supper, dancing would resume and continue until the early morning hours. The preparations for such an event were extensive. Hundreds of workers would spend days transforming the house, installing temporary decorations, arranging flowers throughout the public rooms, and ensuring that every surface gleamed. The family's best china, silver, and crystal would be brought out, polished to perfection, and arranged for the supper service. The kitchen staff would work for days preparing the elaborate menu. Extra servants would be hired temporarily to assist with coat checking, serving, and managing the flow of guests through the crowded rooms. Costume balls represented an even more elaborate form of entertainment. The most famous of these was Alva Vanderbilt's ball in 1883, held to celebrate the completion of her new Fifth Avenue mansion. The ball required guests to appear in historical costumes, leading to months of preparation as families commissioned elaborate outfits from the best costumers. Some guests spent thousands of dollars on their costumes. Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt appeared as an electric light, wearing a gown fitted with actual battery-powered lights that illuminated at the touch of a button concealed in her pocket. Another guest wore a costume featuring a diamond-encrusted beehive headdress with multiple cattails attached, all in tribute to her love of felines. The total cost of this single ball exceeded $250,000, an extraordinary sum for the period. Later costume balls grew even more extravagant and sometimes more bizarre. Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish became famous for hosting unconventional entertainments, including a ball in honor of her dog, who arrived wearing a $15,000 diamond collar. Another fish ball featured a mysterious Prince del Drago of Corsica as guest of honor, who turned out to be a chimpanzee dressed in a tuxedo. The animal apparently grew bored with the proceedings and began swinging from chandeliers while throwing champagne glasses at the assembled guests, creating chaos but also generating tremendous publicity and cementing Mrs. Fish's reputation for memorable parties. The Bradley Martin Ball of 1897 marked something of a culmination and turning point for Gilded Age extravagance. Held at the Waldorf Hotel and costing an estimated several $100,000, the ball featured guests dressed as various European monarchs and nobles. The event generated significant backlash in the press and among the general public, as the ostentatious display of wealth during a period of economic difficulty struck many as insensitive and inappropriate. The controversy surrounding the Bradley Martin Ball contributed to a gradual decline in such elaborate public displays of wealth. Formal dinners were more frequent than balls, but no less carefully orchestrated. A typical dinner for 20 guests would follow a prescribed sequence of courses, beginning with oysters or soup, proceeding through fish, multiple meat courses, and elaborate desserts, and concluding with fruit and coffee. Each course was paired with appropriate wines. The entire meal might last 3 hours or more, with conversation expected to flow smoothly throughout. Seating arrangements were planned carefully to create a social salad of interesting conversational groupings. mixing ages and personalities in ways intended to spark lively discussion. The opera was both cultural event and social obligation during the Gilded Age. Wealthy families maintained boxes at the opera house, attending performances throughout the season. These boxes were furnished with chairs and sometimes included small anterooms where the family could entertain guests during intervals. The opera was as much about seeing and being seen as about appreciating the music. Ladies wore their most magnificent gowns and jewels, creating a visual spectacle that rivaled anything happening on stage. The intervals between acts were devoted to social interaction, with families visiting one another's boxes and promenading through the opera house corridors. Afternoon receptions and teas provided less formal opportunities for social interaction. A lady might announce that she would be at home to receive callers on a particular afternoon, and friends would stop by for brief visits. These at-home days followed strict schedules, with each family having designated days when they received visitors. The ritual allowed for widespread social interaction without the enormous expense of formal entertainments. Guests would stay only 10 or 15 minutes, spending just enough time for polite conversation before moving on to their next call. Charity balls added a philanthropic element to social entertainments. Organizations like the Children's Aid Society hosted annual balls that raised funds for worthy causes while providing opportunities for social display. These events were open to a broader range of attendees than the most exclusive private balls, as anyone who could afford the steep ticket prices was welcome to attend. Charity balls often featured special entertainments, such as tableaux vivants, where costumed participants would pose in artistic scenes, creating living pictures that combined entertainment with cultural sophistication. The social season followed a predictable calendar. In New York, the season began in November and continued through the period before Lent, typically ending in late February or early March. During these months, families might attend 2 or 3 events per week, with the busiest weeks featuring entertainments nearly every night. The pace was exhausting, particularly for debutantes who were being introduced to society and were expected to appear at virtually every event. Young women sometimes attended 5 or 6 balls in a single week, dancing until dawn and then rising for afternoon calls the following day. Summer brought a shift to resort areas like Newport, where the social season continued in a different setting. The Newport season featured many of the same types of events, balls, dinners, and receptions, but also included outdoor entertainments more suited to the season. Lawn parties, picnics, sailing excursions, and outdoor concerts took advantage of the beautiful summer weather and scenic coastal setting. The Casino, a social club designed by Stanford White, hosted tennis tournaments and other sporting events that combined athletics with social interaction. The Newport Casino became a central gathering place for summer society. Tennis tournaments attracted both participants and spectators, with matches becoming social events in their own right. Ladies would attend in elaborate summer dresses, often featuring lighter fabrics and pastel colors more suitable to the season. Gentlemen competed in tennis whites, demonstrating athletic prowess while maintaining appropriate decorum. The casino also hosted various other events, including concerts, lectures, and social gatherings, providing a focal point for daytime activities during the summer season. Yacht races and regattas provided spectacular entertainment for Newport's summer colony. The New York Yacht Club maintained a strong presence in Newport, and members would compete in various classes of sailing craft. Spectators would watch from the shore or from other vessels, making social calls between boats while races were ongoing. Some families owned substantial yachts that served as floating entertainment venues, hosting luncheons and dinners while anchored in Newport Harbor. The combination of competitive sport and social display made yacht racing a highlight of the summer calendar. Polo matches became increasingly popular as the Gilded Age progressed. The sport, imported from Britain and India, appealed to wealthy Americans who could afford to maintain the multiple ponies required for serious play. Polo grounds were established near Newport and other resort areas, and matches attracted large crowds of spectators. Ladies would attend in carriages, watching from the sidelines while taking tea and socializing. The sport combined elements of horsemanship, athleticism, and social exclusivity that perfectly suited Gilded Age sensibilities. Beach activities, while more constrained than modern beachgoing, provided another form of summer recreation. Bathing in the ocean became increasingly popular, though elaborate protocols governed the activity. Ladies would enter the water from bathing machines, small enclosed changing rooms on wheels that could be rolled into shallow water, allowing modest entry without being observed. Bathing costumes were elaborate affairs, covering the body substantially while incorporating enough special design features to allow movement in water. Mixed bathing, where men and women swam in proximity, was controversial but became more common as the century progressed. Garden parties allowed hostesses to show off elaborate landscape designs while entertaining guests in beautiful outdoor settings. These events typically took place in afternoon hours, with refreshments served on terraces or lawns. Live music might accompany the gathering, with chamber ensembles or solo performers providing background entertainment. Garden parties were less formal than indoor events, but still required appropriate dress and behavior. The opportunity to display expensive landscaping and to take advantage of beautiful weather made garden parties popular summer entertainments. Clam bakes and shore dinners provided informal alternatives to more elaborate entertainments. These events, often held on beaches or in seaside pavilions, featured seafood cooked in traditional New England styles. While the food itself was relatively simple, the preparations could be quite elaborate, with servants working for hours to create appropriate settings and presentations. The combination of outdoor location and simple fare created an atmosphere of rustic informality that was actually highly orchestrated and required substantial resources to execute properly. Carriage parades along Ocean Drive in Newport became daily rituals during the summer season. Families would display their finest carriages and horses, driving along the scenic coastal road in late afternoon. This activity combined the pleasure of beautiful scenery with opportunities for social display and interaction. Pedestrians would watch from the sidewalks, identifying the occupants of various carriages and commenting on the quality of equipages. The parade served as a moving exhibition of wealth and taste, with families competing to present the most impressive displays. Evening concerts and musical performances provided cultural entertainment suited to summer settings. Some events took place in outdoor venues, with audiences seated on lawns or terraces while musicians performed from specially constructed bandstands or pavilions. Other concerts were held in the music rooms or ballrooms of great houses, with professional musicians engaged to perform for assembled guests. The repertoire typically included both classical selections and lighter popular music, providing varied entertainment appropriate to mixed audiences. Theatrical performances, whether amateur or professional, occupied summer evenings. Some families organized private theatricals with family members and guests performing in plays or musical entertainments. These events required considerable preparation, including costume selection, rehearsals, and set construction. Professional theater companies also performed in Newport and other resort areas, presenting plays in temporary theaters or in spaces adapted for theatrical use. Attendance at these performances provided cultural enrichment and social interaction combined. Throughout all these events, unwritten rules governed behavior and established boundaries. One did not arrive too early or leave too late. One circulated among other guests rather than monopolizing any single person's attention. One avoided controversial topics and maintained pleasant, superficial conversation. One dressed appropriately for each occasion and demonstrated familiarity with the countless small points of etiquette that marked the truly well-bred. Violations of these rules could result in social ostracism, regardless of how wealthy the offending party might be. Dining and culinary customs. The elaborate dining customs of the Gilded Age wealthy reflected both European influences and American abundance. Meals were complex productions that combined haute cuisine with theatrical presentation, requiring coordination among numerous servants and demonstrating the hostess's taste and organizational abilities. The standard formal dinner of the period consisted of numerous courses, each served in a prescribed sequence. A typical elaborate dinner might begin with oysters, followed by soup, a fish course, an entree such as sweetbreads or chicken in sauce, a relevé or joint of roast meat. Perhaps a sorbet served as a palate cleanser, game such as duck or quail. a cold dish featuring expensive ingredients like foie gras or truffles, multiple desserts including both hot and cold options, and finally fruit, coffee, and liqueurs. Each course would be accompanied by appropriate wines, with different vintages selected to complement each dish. The presentation of these meals required extraordinary coordination. Footmen would serve each course simultaneously to all guests, approaching from the left and withdrawing to the right in carefully choreographed movements. The butler would oversee the service, ensuring that wine glasses were filled at appropriate moments and that each course proceeded smoothly. In the kitchen, the chef and his staff would be working frantically to prepare multiple complex dishes, timing everything so that courses could be served at their peak of perfection. The logistical challenges of serving a hot meal to 20 or 30 people simultaneously should not be underestimated. Table settings were elaborate and highly specific. The proper dinner table featured fine china, often custom-made and monogrammed for the family. Sterling silver flatware appeared in bewildering profusion, with different implements for each course and type of food. Fish required special fish forks and knives. Oysters had their own forks. Soup could be eaten with either a round soup spoon or an oval soup spoon depending on the type of soup. The array of crystal glasses included water goblets, wine glasses in multiple sizes and shapes for different varieties of wine, champagne flutes, and cordial glasses for after-dinner drinks. Centerpieces for formal dinners could be extraordinarily elaborate. Fresh flowers were arranged in silver or crystal vases, often with considerable artistry. Some centerpieces featured sculptural elements, fruit arrangements, or other decorative objects. Ward McAllister, Caroline Astor's social advisor, once famously economized by limiting the number of orchids on the dinner table to only 1,000, suggesting the scale of floral decoration that might appear at the very grandest events. Dining etiquette was complex and strictly observed. Guests did not begin eating until the hostess took the first bite of each course. Conversation should be pleasant and general, avoiding controversial topics. One was expected to eat from each course that was served, though it was acceptable to eat only a small portion. The proper use of cutlery was essential, with each implement used only for its designated purpose. Green peas, for instance, should be eaten with a fork alone, never with the assistance of a knife, no matter how dexterously the feat might be performed. Grasping wine glasses by the bowl rather than the stem marked one as unfamiliar with proper form. Seating arrangements at formal dinners followed strict protocols. The hostess sat at one end of the table, the host at the other. The most important male guest would be seated to the hostess's right, the most important female guest to the host's right. The remainder of the table would be arranged according to rank and social importance, with careful attention paid to creating interesting conversational groupings. Men and women alternated around the table. Married couples were never seated together, as the point was to create opportunities for varied conversation rather than to allow comfortable domestic chat. The progression from dining room to drawing room after meals followed gender-specific patterns. After dinner concluded, the ladies would withdraw to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen at the table or adjourning with them to a smoking room or library. This separation allowed the men to smoke cigars, drink port or brandy, and engage in conversation unsuitable for mixed company. After a suitable interval, usually 30 to 45 minutes, the gentlemen would rejoin the ladies in the drawing room for coffee and continued socializing. Restaurants like Delmonico's provided settings for formal dining outside the home. Delmonico's operated multiple locations in New York, with the Madison Square location serving as a particular favorite of the wealthy. The restaurant's banquet rooms could accommodate large groups, and Delmonico's reputation for excellent French cuisine made it a popular choice for subscription dinners and other events. A dinner at Delmonico's typically cost $12 to $15 per person, a substantial sum when a skilled worker might earn $2 or $3 for a full day's labor. Menus for formal dinners were often printed on elaborate cards as keepsakes for guests. These cards, sometimes created by companies like Tiffany's, featured the menu printed in French with artistic decorations and embellishments. Collecting menu cards became a popular hobby among those who attended numerous formal dinners, and surviving examples provide detailed documentation of what was actually served at these events. The food itself reflected both French culinary traditions and American abundance. Dishes like consommé, filet of sole with delicate sauces, tenderloin of beef with truffle garnish, roasted game birds, and elaborate pastries were standard fare. The ingredients were the finest available, with produce often grown in the family's own greenhouses, meat from premium suppliers, and seafood rushed from coastal markets to arrive at peak freshness. Terrapin, a now endangered turtle species, was considered a particular delicacy and appeared frequently on elaborate menus. Breakfast and lunch, while less formal than dinner, still followed established patterns. Breakfast featured multiple courses, though guests could choose which items to consume. Luncheon might consist of 4 or 5 courses served with appropriate wines, but generally lighter than dinner. Afternoon tea was a meal unto itself, with delicate sandwiches, scones with jam and cream, and various cakes and pastries accompanying the tea service. Special occasions called for even more elaborate culinary displays. Wedding breakfasts, despite their name, were typically held in the early afternoon and featured elaborate menus with numerous courses. Supper at balls, served at midnight or later, included substantial offerings despite the late hour. The wealthiest families maintained conservatories that could provide fresh strawberries and other out-of-season produce for special events, allowing them to serve foods unavailable to anyone else. The cost of maintaining such elaborate dining standards was substantial. A wealthy household might spend thousands of dollars monthly on food alone, with additional expenses for wine, servants' wages, table linens, and replacement china and crystal as items inevitably broke. Yet these expenses were considered necessary to maintaining one's social position. The quality of meals served, the elegance of presentation, and the smoothness of service all contributed to a family's reputation and standing within high society. Transportation and travel. The mobility of Gilded Age wealthy families was extraordinary for its time, made possible by private transportation that included railway cars, yachts, and various forms of wheeled vehicles. These conveyances were not merely practical necessities, but also important status symbols and settings for continued social interaction. Private railway cars represented the pinnacle of luxury travel during this period. These custom-built coaches attached to regular passenger trains, allowing wealthy families to travel across the country in personal comfort while still taking advantage of established rail networks and schedules. A typical private car might measure 80 feet in length and include sleeping accommodations, a full kitchen, a dining area, an observation lounge with comfortable seating, and quarters for servants. The interiors featured the finest materials, with mahogany paneling, plush upholstery, fine china and silver for dining, and all the conveniences of home. The Pullman Company of Chicago was the premier manufacturer of these luxury railway cars. George Pullman had perfected the sleeper car design and expanded into building custom private cars for the wealthiest Americans. A private car purchased from Pullman might cost $40,000 or more, equivalent to several $1 million in modern purchasing power. Operating the car required additional expenses, as owners paid fees to have their cars attached to trains and transported to desired destinations. The Frick family's private car, the Westmoreland, exemplified the genre. Purchased in 1911 for just under $40,000, the car transported the family between their homes in Pittsburgh, New York, and Pride's Crossing, Massachusetts. The interior featured fine woods, elegant furnishings, and custom china service. The car was inherited by Helen Clay Frick after her father's death and remained in use for several decades, eventually being offered for use as a potential mobile White House for presidential candidate Wendell Willkie, though this plan never materialized. Yachts provided another form of private transportation favored by the very wealthy. These vessels ranged from relatively modest sailing craft to enormous steam-powered ships that rivaled naval vessels in size and appointments. The largest private yachts of the Gilded Age measured over 200 feet in length and required professional crews of 50 or more to operate. They featured luxurious accommodations, including staterooms for family and guests, formal dining saloons, libraries, and deck spaces designed for entertainment and relaxation. Ownership of a substantial yacht carried enormous prestige, but also required continuous expenditure. A large yacht might cost several $100,000 to build, and annual operating expenses, including crew wages, maintenance, fuel, and docking fees, could easily equal or exceed the initial purchase price. Despite these costs, yachts were highly popular among the wealthiest families who used them for coastal cruising, international travel, and floating entertainment venues for social events. In cities, wealthy families maintained private carriages for daily transportation. These horse-drawn vehicles came in numerous varieties designed for different purposes. A formal carriage for making afternoon calls would be enclosed and elegantly appointed, with the family crest displayed on the door. A more casual phaeton or victoria might be used for drives in the park. Specialized vehicles existed for nearly every purpose, from small gigs for quick trips to heavy broughams for formal occasions. The appearance and quality of carriages served as important status indicators. Wealthy families commissioned custom carriages built to their specifications, featuring the finest woods, leather upholstery, and metal fittings. The horses pulling these carriages were carefully selected for appearance, with matched pairs being particularly prized. Coachmen wore livery in the family colors and were trained to drive with precision and style. The entire equipage, carriage, horses, and driver together, created a mobile display of wealth and taste. With the advent of the automobile in the 1890s, wealthy families were among the first to adopt this new technology. Early motor cars were expensive, unreliable, and required considerable knowledge to operate, but they offered unprecedented independence and speed. By the early 1900s, wealthy families were commissioning custom automobile bodies built on chassis from manufacturers like Rolls-Royce and Mercedes. These early luxury automobiles featured sumptuous interiors and were often operated by chauffeurs who combined mechanical knowledge with driving skill. Long-distance travel frequently took wealthy Americans to Europe. Transatlantic steamship lines competed for the patronage of wealthy travelers by offering luxurious accommodations and exceptional service. Families would typically travel first class, occupying large staterooms or even entire suites on the upper decks. The voyage itself became a social event, with formal dinners, dances, and other entertainments organized for first-class passengers. Shopping trips to Paris, cultural tours of Italy, and summer stays at European resorts were common reasons for these transatlantic journeys. The seasonal migrations of wealthy families required moving enormous quantities of clothing, personal effects, and sometimes even furniture between residences. When preparing to leave their New York mansion for the summer in Newport, a family might ship dozens of trunks ahead, containing wardrobes for the entire season, linens, personal treasures, and various other necessities. Servants would travel in advance to open the summer house, unpack everything, and prepare for the family's arrival. The logistics of these seasonal moves were complex, requiring careful planning and coordination among multiple properties and staffs. Travel within resort areas like Newport often involved smaller-scale conveyances. Families might use horse-drawn carriages for local trips or simply walk when distances were short and weather permitted. Ocean bathing became increasingly popular, with special bathing machines, small changing rooms on wheels, allowing modest entry into the water. Sailing was a favorite pastime, with families owning smaller sailing craft for recreational use in addition to any larger yachts they might maintain. The infrastructure supporting all this movement was substantial. Stable buildings at city mansions housed horses and carriages, with grooms and coachmen living in quarters above. Specialized tack rooms contained the elaborate harnesses and equipment needed for various types of carriages. As automobiles became more common, garages were added or carriage houses converted, requiring different types of staff with mechanical rather than equestrian expertise. Throughout all this movement, the appearance of effortless ease was maintained. Servants handled all the practical details, ensuring that trunks were packed, transportation was arranged, and everything proceeded smoothly. The family simply appeared at the appropriate time and place, their comfort and convenience made possible by considerable planning and labor that remained invisible to casual observers. Art and cultural pursuits. The collection and display of art was among the most important pursuits of Gilded Age wealthy families, serving both as personal enjoyment and as public demonstration of cultural sophistication. The art accumulated by American families during this period would eventually form the core collections of many major American museums. French art was particularly prized by Gilded Age collectors. Paintings by artists of the Barbizon school, works from the Paris salons, and contemporary French academic painting appeared in virtually every major American collection. Artists like Jean-François Millet, whose scenes of rural life combined sentimentality with technical skill, were especially popular. William Henry Vanderbilt's collection, catalogued in 1884, featured numerous examples of French painting alongside European Old Masters and contemporary American works. The mechanisms of art acquisition were well established by the Gilded Age. Gallery owners like Goupil and Durand-Ruel maintained locations in both Europe and America, facilitating the transfer of artworks across the Atlantic. American collectors often dealt directly with these galleries, commissioning agents to bid at European auctions or traveling personally to Paris and London to view and purchase works. The relationships between collectors and dealers were often long-standing and involved considerable trust, as authenticity and quality were crucial concerns. Portrait painting remained important despite the availability of photography. Wealthy families commissioned painted portraits from leading artists, both for personal satisfaction and for posterity. These portraits would hang in prominent locations in the mansion, establishing family lineage and importance. Multiple portraits of the same individual were not uncommon, as a family might commission different artists to capture various life stages or simply to fill different rooms in different residences. American artists also found eager patrons among the wealthy. John Singer Sargent became the preeminent society portraitist of his generation, painting members of wealthy families with a combination of technical brilliance and psychological insight. His portrait of Elizabeth Winthrop Chandler, painted in 1893, showed her flanked by old master paintings, suggesting both her sophisticated taste and her connection to historical traditions. Other American artists like Cecilia Bowes, Mary Cassatt, and William Merritt Chase also received commissions from wealthy patrons. The organization of art within the home was carefully considered. Picture galleries became increasingly common features of the grandest mansions, providing dedicated spaces for displaying collections. These galleries were designed with proper lighting, often using skylights or large windows to illuminate artworks naturally. Some families installed electric lighting specifically to allow evening viewing of their collections, a significant innovation at a time when most interior lighting was still provided by gas or candles. Beyond painting, wealthy collectors acquired sculpture, decorative arts, rare books, and various antiquities. Egyptian artifacts, Asian ceramics and textiles, medieval tapestries, Renaissance furniture, all appeared in Gilded Age collections. The eclectic mixture reflected both genuine appreciation and the influence of dealers who promoted various categories of objects to their wealthy clientele. The founding of museums represented an important shift in how art collections functioned. Rather than remaining purely private possessions, some collectors began making provisions for their collections to eventually enter public institutions. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York opened in 1870. With wealthy collectors playing crucial roles in its establishment and early development. Catherine Lorillard Wolfe bequeathed more than 100 paintings to the Metropolitan in 1887, along with funds for their maintenance, becoming one of the museum's earliest significant benefactors. Henry Clay Frick represents a particularly interesting case in art collecting. While Frick is now best known for his collection of old master paintings housed in the Frick Collection in New York, he also collected contemporary works during his lifetime. His collection included paintings by artists like Pascal d'Agnan Bouverie, whose religious and genre scenes enjoyed considerable popularity in the late 19th century. These contemporary acquisitions, many of which eventually went to institutions like the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, demonstrate the range of Frick's interests and the complex motivations behind Gilded Age collecting. Art collecting served multiple purposes simultaneously. It provided personal pleasure and aesthetic enrichment. It demonstrated cultural sophistication and familiarity with European traditions. It functioned as a form of investment, as valuable artworks could appreciate over time. And it allowed wealthy families to participate in a form of competition that was considered more refined than simple displays of material wealth. Owning a Rembrandt or a Titian conveyed a different kind of status than owning a yacht, though the very wealthiest families managed to own both. Cultural pursuits extended beyond art collecting to include patronage of music, theater, and literature. Wealthy families maintained boxes at the opera and symphony, attended theatrical performances, and sometimes funded artistic endeavors directly. Some collected rare books and manuscripts, building libraries that rivaled those of public institutions. Others supported individual artists through commissions or ongoing patronage relationships that allowed artists to work without financial concerns. The relationship between wealth and culture was complex during the Gilded Age. On one hand, the enormous concentrations of wealth made possible unprecedented patronage of the arts, funding institutions, and collections that continue to serve the public today. On the other hand, the emphasis on European art and European standards sometimes worked against the development of distinctly American artistic traditions. Wealthy collectors wanted old masters and established reputations, which meant that innovative American artists often struggled to find support. By the end of the Gilded Age, American museums housed collections that could rival those of European institutions. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, and other institutions had been established and significantly enriched through the patronage of wealthy families. Individual collections like Frick's would eventually become museums in their own right. The cultural infrastructure built during the Gilded Age would continue to shape American artistic life throughout the 20th century and beyond. Social rules and etiquette. The elaborate system of social etiquette that governed Gilded Age high society was simultaneously its organizing principle and its most important barrier to entry. Knowing and following these countless unwritten rules separated those who truly belonged from those who merely possessed wealth. Mastery of etiquette required years of training, constant attention, and the kind of insider knowledge that came from being raised within the system. The practice of calling or paying visits illustrates the complexity of Gilded Age social customs. Each family designated specific days when they would be at home to receive callers. These at-home days were publicized among one's social circle, allowing friends to know when they might appropriately visit. A caller would arrive during the designated hours, typically between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, and would be received in the drawing room if the lady of the house was indeed receiving that day. The duration of a call was strictly limited. 10 to 15 minutes was considered appropriate, long enough to demonstrate friendly interest but not so long as to impose on the hostess's time. Staying longer than 20 minutes bordered on rudeness. If the lady of the house was not receiving or was genuinely unavailable, the caller would leave a visiting card on a silver tray positioned in the entrance hall specifically for this purpose. The servant who answered the door would convey the card to the mistress, who would then be obligated to return the call within a specified period. Visiting cards themselves were subject to elaborate rules. The size, quality of paper, and style of printing all conveyed information about the caller's social position. Cards were typically engraved rather than printed, with the name appearing in a specific style of script. Married women's cards might show both given and surname, while unmarried women's cards would indicate only surname. The corners of cards could be turned down in specific ways to convey different meanings. Learning these subtle signals required careful observation and instruction. The hierarchy of social precedents governed countless situations. At dinner parties, guests were seated according to rank, with the most important positioned nearest the host and hostess. When entering a room, the eldest or highest-ranking woman would enter first, followed by others in descending order of importance. When making introductions, one presented the younger person to the older, the man to the woman, the less important to the more important. Violations of these hierarchical principles could cause genuine offense. Correspondence followed equally strict protocols. Letters began with appropriate salutations that reflected the relationship between writer and recipient. Dear Mrs. Smith indicated formal acquaintance, while My dear Mrs. Smith suggested warmer friendship. The closing of letters mattered greatly, with phrases like yours sincerely or respectfully yours conveying appropriate levels of formality. Handwriting itself was scrutinized as an indicator of breeding and education, with elegant penmanship considered essential for anyone claiming gentility. Invitations to social events were extended through formal cards, engraved with specific wording that varied depending on the occasion. An invitation to a formal dinner would be sent several weeks in advance, allowing guests to make appropriate arrangements. Accepting or declining these invitations required prompt responses, also on formal cards. Declining an invitation obligated one to provide a plausible excuse and to remain relatively inconspicuous for the evening of the declined event, as being seen elsewhere on that night would suggest the excuse was false. Behavior at social events was governed by countless small rules. At dinner, one did not begin eating before the hostess took the first bite. One conversed equally with dinner partners to both left and right, turning periodically to ensure neither neighbor was neglected. Topics of conversation should be pleasant and general, avoiding anything controversial or disturbing. At balls, young ladies maintained dance cards, small booklets where partners would sign up for specific dances. A proper young lady would distribute her dances among various partners rather than dancing repeatedly with any single gentleman. The rules governing relationships between unmarried men and women were particularly strict. A young lady did not appear in public unchaperoned with a gentleman to whom she was not related or engaged. Conversations between young people at social events were monitored by watchful chaperones, typically mothers or other female relatives. A gentleman might call upon a lady at her home only during specific hours and only if he had been properly introduced. The entire system was designed to protect reputations while allowing appropriate opportunities for courtship and marriage. Dress codes for various occasions were complex and unforgiving. Morning dress, afternoon dress, and evening dress were entirely distinct categories with different requirements. Within each category, further gradations existed depending on the specific event. A garden party required different attire than a formal call. A family dinner necessitated different clothing than a ball. Wearing the wrong thing marked one as ignorant of proper form, a serious social failing. Even the most mundane activities involved etiquette considerations. Walking on city streets required knowledge of where to position oneself relative to others. A gentleman walking with a lady would position himself on the outside, nearest the street, protecting her from splashing vehicles and other street hazards. A lady would slightly lift her skirts when crossing streets to avoid soiling expensive fabrics, but not so high as to reveal more ankle than was considered proper. The simple act of perambulating from one location to another became a carefully choreographed performance. The social arbiter Ward McAllister devoted his life to codifying and enforcing these rules. His alliance with Mrs. Astor allowed him to function as a kind of gatekeeper, determining who possessed the necessary knowledge and breeding to be accepted into the highest circles. McAllister's memoir, Society as I Have Found It, published in 1890, attempted to explain the complex social system he helped create, though its publication generated significant backlash from those who valued privacy and discretion. The concept of the 400 epitomized the exclusivity of Gilded Age high society. When McAllister revealed the list of names to the New York Times in 1892, the publication generated enormous public interest and considerable controversy. The list was criticized for errors, omissions, and what some saw as McAllister's presumption in appointing himself arbiter of social acceptability. Nevertheless, the idea of a definable social elite, small enough to fit in Mrs. Astor's ballroom and exclusive enough to reject even the wealthy if they lacked proper credentials, captured the essence of Gilded Age social organization. Breaking these rules carried real consequences. Social ostracism could result from serious violations of etiquette, effectively ending one's participation in high society, regardless of wealth. Families who failed to follow proper protocols, who showed ignorance of the countless small rules, or who simply did not fit the established mold found themselves excluded from important events, dropped from invitation lists, and generally frozen out of the social world they aspired to join. Yet the system was not completely closed. New wealth could eventually transform into social acceptance if handled with sufficient care and patience. The key was demonstrating mastery of the complex rules, showing familiarity with European culture and aristocratic traditions, and cultivating relationships with those already established within high society. The Vanderbilt family's eventual acceptance, after years of being excluded by families like the Astors, demonstrated that social boundaries, though real, were not entirely impermeable to those who combined great wealth with determination and strategic social maneuvering. Conclusion. The world of Gilded Age wealth, with its grand mansions and elaborate social rituals, existed for only a few decades in its most concentrated form. By the early 20th century, changes in taxation, shifting social attitudes, and the enormous expenses required to maintain such establishments began to make this lifestyle increasingly difficult to sustain. The outbreak of World War I marked a decisive break with the past, as the conflict brought social changes that would permanently alter American society. Many of the physical remnants of this era remain visible today. The great Newport cottages, preserved as museums, allow visitors to walk through rooms where society's most important events once unfolded. Fifth Avenue mansions that survived the wrecking ball now house museums and cultural institutions. The art collections assembled by Gilded Age families continue to enrich public museums across America. These tangible legacies connect present and past, offering glimpses into a vanished way of life. Yet the social system that animated these physical structures has largely disappeared. The rigid hierarchies, the elaborate rules of etiquette, the careful distinctions between old money and new, these have given way to more fluid and democratic social arrangements. Modern wealth, while still conferring advantages, does not command the same type of social power that Gilded Age wealth did. The idea that a single individual like Mrs. Astor could determine who belonged to polite society seems almost incomprehensible from a contemporary perspective. The Gilded Age families left complex legacies. Their philanthropy established institutions that continue to serve the public. Their patronage supported artists and enriched American cultural life. Their architectural ambitions created landmarks that define the character of American cities. Yet their concentration of wealth, their ostentatious displays, and their exclusionary social systems also exemplified the inequalities and excesses of their time. The institutions founded with Gilded Age wealth remain active today. Universities, hospitals, libraries, and museums across America trace their origins to donations from families who made fortunes during this period. These institutions have outlasted the social systems that created them, providing lasting benefits to communities far beyond the exclusive circles where the wealth was first concentrated. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, Carnegie Libraries, and countless other cultural and educational institutions represent the more enduring aspects of Gilded Age wealth. The architectural heritage of the Gilded Age continues to shape how we understand American history and culture. The great mansions of Newport stand as monuments to a particular moment in time, preserved and maintained for public education and enjoyment. Walking through these spaces allows modern visitors to experience directly the scale and ambition of Gilded Age society. The ornate details, the imported materials, the technological innovations all speak to the resources and determination that went into creating these structures. The art collections assembled during this period form the cores of major American museums. Works that were purchased by Gilded Age collectors for private enjoyment now hang in public galleries, accessible to anyone who wishes to view them. The transition from private possession to public trust represents one of the more positive aspects of how concentrated wealth eventually dispersed and democratized. Museums founded by wealthy families or built to house their collections continue to educate and inspire new generations. Understanding how these families actually lived, the daily routines they followed, the rules they observed, the objects they surrounded themselves with, provides insight into a particular moment in American history. The Gilded Age was a period of extraordinary transformation, when industrial capitalism created fortunes of unprecedented size, when American wealth began to rival European aristocratic resources, and when the newly rich struggled to define what American high society should become. The secrets of Gilded Age life were not mysterious so much as carefully guarded, shared only among those who belonged to the exclusive circles where these customs prevailed. By examining the concrete details of mansions and servants, fashion and etiquette, social events and cultural pursuits, we gain access to that inner world and better understand the foundations of American high society. The elaborate systems of protocol and the emphasis on European models reveal a society deeply concerned with establishing legitimacy and permanence, even as the very forces that created their wealth were transforming American life in ways that would eventually undermine their privileged position. If you have enjoyed this exploration of how the wealthiest families lived during America's Gilded Age, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more historical documentaries designed for relaxation and thoughtful listening.